Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Microsoft Power BI UK user group. I'm your host Leon Gordon, and we're back for another weekly dose of Power BI learning and fun together as a community as we continue to grow and develop on our journey in data. Now, as always, we want this to be an interactive session, so please do feel free to let us know where you're joining in from in our Q&A, and also what you want to learn from today's session. In today's session, we're going to be looking at learning M using the UI with Matt Allington. Now, Matt Allington is a career expert in BI, as I'm sure that the majority of you are aware, and he has over 30 years experience in using data to deliver business value. Matt is also a Microsoft MVP that specializes in Power BI, Power Query, and Power Pivot for Excel. Now, with that being said, I'll hand you over to Matt for his session.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Leon. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Hello, UK from Australia. And so let me get straight into my presentation, and I'll talk about what I'm going to cover and then how we're going to progress from there. So I just said to Leon a second ago, I'm going to make a last minute change to my slide, and I somehow accidentally lost that slide. Let me quickly try and bring that back. No, I can't do that. Okay, so Leon's already introduced me, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. So I guess the key thing that wasn't covered in Leon's intro is that my background, I worked for Coca-Cola. So I spent most of my career working with data rather than working in technical roles, although I did have 10 years working in IT. And so I really consider myself to be an Excel expert come good, if I could call it that. And certainly Power BI has become the go-to product for Excel users around the world who want to do more with their data, particularly business intelligence data. So this is my book if you're interested, and I've actually done now 5 different versions of that book, so it's been quite popular over the years. The objective of this session is that I want to introduce you to the M language. So it is a Power Query session, of course, but really the focus of this session is talking about the M language, but not from a programming sense. As I said, I'm an Excel guy, right? So I learned to program in Visual Basic, but I didn't go to a university to learn how to program. What I did was I got under the hood, I turned on the macro recorder, I recorded some things, and then I opened up the code and basically worked out myself how VBA works. And so it's the same, to me, it's the same with the M language. You can learn programming in the M language just by treating Power Query like the macro recorder in VBA. And I'm going to show you some techniques that I use and have used and continue to use in order to get the most out of this. So the whole focus of this is I want to use the user interface, but also merge the concept of the M language as we go. So obviously just a quick intro, which I'm doing now, but then I'm going to be doing 3 demos. So I'll talk about these in detail as we go, and I'm going to pause briefly at the end of each of those demos just to see if there's any questions. So feel free to type your questions in. Leon's going to be monitoring those as we go. So if you've got any questions that come up, just type them in, and I'll do my best to answer those after each session, and then time permitting at the end, I'm more than happy to take any other questions. I do have a company with Ken Pools. You may also know of Ken Pools. He's an MVP, Excel MVP, a friend of mine. We have a company called skillwave.training, and I've got a discount coupon if you're interested in getting some of the learnings from our training company. I'll show that at the end. Okay, I like to start my presentations with this slide. I've been using this slide for 5 or 6 years now. Self-service BI, and more specifically Power BI, is a process that can be used for business users, for Excel users. And I like to group the flow of data into 4 logical stages. And so the first stage is data acquisition. Now, the first step is that we have to grab the data, wherever it is, and load it into Power BI. And Power BI is a database. It's not a spreadsheet. And so So there's a lot more of the techniques which are used in enterprise database management that are used within Power BI, or specifically when Power Query is the tool to do that. So first step, get the data into the database. The second step is called data modeling. And suffice to say in this session that once the data is in the database, it's not fit for purpose for reporting. Work needs to be done on that raw data to prepare it in such a way that you can get the most out of the data. So creating relationships, writing measures, those sorts of things. Once you've done those two things, it's then that you can start to visualize your data. So these 5-minute demos that you see on YouTube produced by Microsoft only work because somebody's done these two previous steps. And then finally, once you build your visualizations, hopefully you'll go ahead and share them with other people and add value through that process. So the session that we're going to be doing today is clearly focused in this first box in the data acquisition. And so just so you understand how that fits into the big picture. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into the first demo now. There will be a slide at the end of each demo just to summarize what I've covered. But this is going to be pretty heavy on demos. So this first demo, I'm going to extract some values from a specific cell in a spreadsheet and use that specific value in a table that I load into Power BI. Okay, so let me get into a demo. I'm going to show you the data first of all. So this will be a file combined demo. Many of you would have done this type of loading of data using Power Query before. I'll just open this file, so one of these files. They're all in the same structure. This is sample demo data, and you can see that I've got row 4, I've got a heading, product and quantity, and then importantly, notice that I've got some text up here. So this is text telling me when the job was run. So what I'm trying to do here is simulate an Excel export from some system that comes out on a regular basis. And notice in cell B2, there's the date of the extract. Now, this is pretty common, and I've set this up deliberately to create failures in the data load, the data combine. But importantly, we really need to get this date out of this cell, and we need to put a date column down here. And I'm going to show you that, and also at the same time cover this concept of learning M from the UI. So before we move on, I'm going to copy this path here. I always prefer to copy the path to my files from Windows Explorer than to use the user interface in Power BI. All right, so I've got some open workbooks. I'm going to get data, not from the Excel workbook, because I'm going to do a file combine. So I need to click on More. And I'll click on Folder. And then this is the UI I don't like. When you click Browse here, it takes you all the way back to the top, and you have to go looking for your files. Typically, you'd already have found the files in Windows Explorer. I just find this a lot easier. So then I'll click Browse, just make sure I'm in the right place, which I am. And click OK. So the wizard says, OK, I found 3 files, very good. I'm going to combine and transform the data. Now, if I just hit Combine, Power Query would try and do its stuff, and it's going to make some mistakes, which you'll see in a minute. So this is the Combine Files wizard. The way I like to explain this wizard is that we're going to teach Power Query how to process a single file. And once Power Query understands how to process a single file, we will ask Power Query to repeat that process for every file in the folder. That's how Combine Files works. And so for the first file it finds, we're going to teach Power Query what to do. So you need to find the sheet 1 and go ahead and load that sheet. And there is a bug in Power Query. It's in Power BI. It's been there for several years. Power Query is open, but it's currently hidden behind the other window. I logged this as a bug more than 2 years ago, still not fixed. All right, so here's the file combine tables and queries that were generated. This is quite complex. I do have a blog article on this, and I've got a link in my slides. All you really need to know here is that this query here is teach me how to process a single file, And this query here is now combine them all and load them all together. So red is combined, red is single file, blue is combined. So I'm going to work on this query, and you can see that automatically it connected to the source, it navigated to the sheet. That's the bit that I did in the wizard. And then Power Query, trying to help me, has gone ahead and promoted the first row to header, but that is not correct. This is not what we want to do in this case. And so I'm going to delete that step. Now, throughout this demo, I'm going to be talking about the formula bar at the top. You cannot be good at Power Query if you don't turn on the formula bar. So if you don't have it on, come up to view, here it is up here. Make sure you turn on the formula bar so that you can see what's going on. This is the code that's being generated by Power Query under the hood. All right, so what I'm going to do, I don't need this first row, so I'm going to remove the top rows. So remove top rows 1. And now I've got a problem because I need to do 2 things. I need to keep this part of the table, but I also need to keep the value in this cell. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So if I come to this cell here, notice down the bottom, and I'm not going to zoom in because it doesn't work particularly well, but when I select this cell, notice down the bottom that the contents of that cell is being presented to me as a value, as a scalar value. So sometimes when you click on an object, you'll see, I can't really sort of show you here, but sometimes when you sit on an object, you'll see a table down the bottom. In this case, I'm seeing a single value. So this is a sign that this value can be extracted from this cell. And to do that, you right-click on the cell and select drill down. Now, when I do that, notice that that value, that scalar value that used to be displayed down the bottom is now displayed up the top. And so I've basically changed my entire query to just display that single value. But this is what's important. I want you to understand what's going on here. This here is the code, the M code that's been generated by that step of right-clicking and drill down. And it's in 3 parts. The first part, the red part, says remove top rows. This refers to, in this case, it's the previous step in my query. And so basically what this says is take whatever you had in the previous step in the query. And I'll lose my color coding here, but basically I had this. So it says, so the first step or the first portion of this M code says, take whatever I had previously in the query, which was this. The second part, this curly brace, is the row indicator. Now, unfortunately, Power Query and the M language has a zero-based row indicator or a zero-based numbering scheme. And so 0 means, in this case, the first row. 1 means the second row, 2 is the third row, and so on. So what this says is take whatever's in the first row, and then the square brackets in this case refers to the column name. And so let me come back to this step. If you look at this, the intersection between column 2 and the first row, which is called row 0, is the value inside that cell. And so what this M code,
sorry to just jump in there. Is it possible to zoom slightly on the formula?
Does that work?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for calling that out. Sometimes it doesn't work. My screen zoom doesn't work during presentations, but no problem. So first portion is the previous step. The second portion, curly braces, means the row indicator, and then the square brackets in this case means the column indicator, and this is the intersection of all of those things. All right, so great. I'm going to rename this. This will be my date. And it's good practice to rename the steps inside Power Query if they're important to you. If I come back to this step, I'm going to rename this as well. This is going to be my full data, I'll call it. You can call these things whatever you want. So here's my full data and here's my date. Now what I can do is I can add a new manual step. So I'm going to click on FX, and by default, when you add a new manual step, Power Query will automatically take the previous step, which in this case is date. But you don't have to accept that. If you want to change it, you can actually refer to any step previous. And so automatically it'll take the previous step. But in this case, I want to grab the data that was here. So if I go back to full data, I need this table back. So I'm going to change this custom step. I'm going to call it full data, or I'm going to refer to full data. And when I do that, I'll click the tick, but now I've got my data back. So here's the date. The date still exists, but now my query is back where I was before. So now that I've done this, I'm going to remove top rows 2. And then I'm going to use first row as header. And now I've got the pieces that I need to be able to bring my date in. So what I'm going to do here is add column, custom column. And in this custom column, I'll bring this up here. In this custom column, I can add any scalar value, right? So I could, for example, put in the value 4, click OK, and that will add the value 4 into the column. But in this case, what I want to do is, instead of using the value 4, I want to grab the scalar value from this step called date. So when I say date here, notice there's no quotes around it. So no quotes, that means it's referring to this scalar value that I created up here. I couldn't do this, or not as easily, if it was a table, but because it's a value, I can certainly do that. So I just go equals date, and that inserts the date for me in that column. I'm going to come up here and change it to a date. So now I've completed the first query, this one here. I've now taught Power BI how to create the load of a single file. The next thing I need to do is come and fix this combine from all files. And so I'll just click on here. Normally, the error is caused because I've changed this first query. Normally, it's the last step. I'm just going to delete that last step. In this case, that fixed the query. I don't need the file name, so I'll remove that. And I'm going to just select the columns, and from the menu, go transform, detect data type. And that's it. And then what I would normally do is I'd call this, sales or something like that. It's good to give these queries a name, and then I'll close and apply. I'll just let that load so that you can see that we've got our data up. And from there, I can just go ahead and build a table of some sort. I'll put the product codes, and probably should do it the other way around. I'll change that to, I didn't change the name of my date column. I should have done that as well. And so there we have it. Now, of course, one of the benefits of file combine is that at some point in time, you'll get a new file. When you get a new file, you just have to add it to this folder and then hit refresh. And in doing that, the new data will get loaded, and it's just self-healing from there. Okay, so let me just summarize with a slide, and then I'll take any questions. So if you've got any questions, please type them into the Q&A now. So in summary, if you want to learn M, you need to turn on the formula bar. You will not learn by doing that. Take a look at the code that's generated so you can understand how it works. Generally speaking, the language is a functional language. I didn't talk about this, but it's a functional language. So everything inside the M language is a function. It normally refers to a previous step and then has one or more parameters. I've indicated that you can right-click and drill down to get any value in a cell. And when you do that, you get this syntax that you can see here. It's the name of the step, the row number with a zero-based numbering scheme followed by the column name. And you don't have to complete your Power Query M steps in order. They can be done in any order that you want. And here's the link to that blog article where I explain a lot more about what's going on in that Power Query combine. All right, so let me just jump over to Leon and see whether we have any questions at this stage.
Thanks, Matt. We do have one question. It's an anonymous question, and they ask, in Power Query, when you have the queries pane on the left-hand side, if you have multiple queries, is it possible to search for a query there by name?
I'm going to take a liberty and assume that when the question is search for a query by name, that it's referring to a previous query. So these applied steps are local in scope to the query that you're working on. So we'll go back to the one that I had here. So I'm able to add a column here that refers to this step, but what I'm not able to do is refer to a step in a previous query. I'm not sure if that's what the question is. I mean, as far as searching for a query by name, I mean, if you've got lots of queries here, you know, it's going to be pretty tough. I've got a feeling that I thought there was a search over here. So here's all the named queries. So maybe you can't do a search in this pane over here. I certainly can't see any way of doing it. But if you've got so many queries down the left-hand side that you can't find the one that you need and you need to search, you've probably got bigger issues. My best advice would be to create some folders. So, I mean, if I create a new blank query here, you can move your queries into groups. So I'll create a new group. I normally like to have a data model group. So I should have called that data model. I like to have a data model group. So anything that gets loaded into Power BI goes into that group. I have another group for raw files. I have another group for staging queries. So just by categorizing them, it can help you find them. So I don't know, hopefully with one of those two answers, I answered the question.
Fantastic, thanks, Matt. And one more question coming in from Fernando, and they ask, the order might be affected by the query folding, is that correct? So I believe they're referring to the order of the applied steps.
Yeah, so query folding does not work in the case of files on your PC anyway. So we can tell that by, you know, if we right click and have a look at view native query, the query folding is not working in this case. If you had query folding, so if I was loading this data from a SQL database, it would be a different use case because I would be less likely to try and to extract a date like I'm doing here. But yeah, you definitely, if you've got query folding where you're sending a query back to a database, typically SQL Server or something like that, you want to be very careful about the order of the steps, because you want all the steps that are foldable. So anything that can be sent back to the database you want to do first, and then start doing transformations that can't be sent back to the database. So an example of a transformation that couldn't be sent back would be a split column. That's a good example. So if you do a split column in an otherwise foldable query, that split column will not be foldable. And if you do that first, you will basically stop the efficiency of query folding.
Excellent, thank you, Matt. And we have another question coming in from Antonio, and they ask, is it possible to drill down whatever kind of data type?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So as long as it's a cell in a table, it could be a date, it could be text, it could be a number. I think what you would find is that Power Query will identify it as an any data type. So that's why you'll see ABC123 at the top. And then you can change the data type to whatever it is that you want. So, so think of drill down as being the absolute or being a cell reference within Excel. So instead of saying go to B3, we're saying go to row 0, column name, whatever. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And that's all of our questions for now.
Okay, excellent. All right, so the second demo I'm going to do is to show relative column names and row names. And so what I just showed you a moment ago is hard-coded. So column name X, row number 1. So that's equivalent to an absolute cell reference in Excel. But you can also do relative cell references within Power Query. So I'm going to show you a demo on that. All right, so for this demo, I'm going to use another sample file, which will be this one here called Consolidate Worksheets. It's also a consolidation exercise, but in this case, the exercise is going to be to consolidate multiple sheets in a workbook. And you can see here that I've got some sheets representing months. So these are sales for a particular month. I've also got some extra sheets here. Once again, I'm trying to simulate a real world situation where someone emails you every month a new workbook, and every month the workbook grows, right? There's a new sheet that's added. So at some point in time, I'm expecting a new workbook with the June data in it. So this is what I'm going to be using for the demo. So I'll close that down, go to a new workbook, and we'll get data. This time I am going to refer to the absolute workbook, which is consolidate worksheets. So it's a similar process at this step, but if you look at the UI now, it's asking me to specify which sheets that I want to load. Now, I don't want to do this because if I select this, so if you click Shift and Shift, if I do that, I'm basically hard coding the names of those 5 sheets. And so when the new workbook comes in, it's not going to work. So in this case, there's a undocumented feature, and that is you can right click on the folder icon at the top and click transform data. And so when I do that, what happens is Power Query does its thing, and it actually loads all of those sheet objects into Power Query as a list like this. So I've basically skipped over the wizard support, and I've gone straight into give me a list of all of the objects within that Excel sheet within Power Query. And so from here, I can do relative manipulation rather than absolute manipulation. So it would be good practice in here to filter out these sheets. Once again, I don't want to just deselect them, because what if someone adds another sheet down the track? And so instead I'll do a text filter does not begin with the word sheet. Now, of course, this is only going to remove a new sheet if it starts with sheet, but I may as well do it a relative filter rather than doing a hard-coded filter. It will save any issues coming up with the word sheet. If someone creates another sheet called temp, then it's not going to solve that problem. But you know, you may as well do what you can do within the situation that we've got. Okay, so now I've got my sheets, and this can grow as long as the sheet's not starting with the word sheet. And now what I'm going to do is manually combine the sheets. So because these are tables, now let me show you this. Remember before when I clicked on a cell? Now when I say click on a cell, I'm not clicking on the hyperlink. I'm clicking in the blank section of the cell. And when I do that, remember when I click on a scalar value, it shows me the value with a grey background. When I click on a table, it shows me the table. And in fact, if I watch it, I don't want to click here, but if I was to click on this table, it would actually expand that single table for me. And then whenever you've got a column with multiple tables in it, such as this one, there'll be this expand tables button. So expand values button. I don't want to keep the original name, and I'll click OK. But all of my sheets combined, notice I don't have all of these extra queries over here on the left this time, because I'm doing it manually. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the first row as headers. So come up here, use first row as header. Now, when you go through this process manually, it's really important to note that there's going to be repeated headers down the page. Let me if I just come back to the previous step, I'm sorry, I realize that there's a trade-off here between Zoom and seeing the screen. But at this, if I come back here, notice how the first row has got product key, but if I come down the bottom here, there's going to be another row of data. I don't know how much data I've got in here. As soon as I get to the second sheet, there's going to be a second header, right? So I think it's on about row 1000. I think I've got about 1000 rows per. You know that thing when you decide to do something and then realize you shouldn't. Another thing I could, just let me delete this and I'll show you. What I could do is I could come here and put a filter on product key. Now here's a little tip. I can actually see it here, but sometimes you'll get this, the list may be incomplete. I know the value that I want to filter on, but the list of values that it gives you doesn't show you the value that you want. This happens a lot if you're looking for the value 0 and you've got lots of negative and positive numbers in your column. So this is what I do. Deselect everything, select any value, and then notice the code at the top. I can, because I selected any value, now using the UI, I can say, well, the value I want, what was it? It was product, was it product name? I'll have to check. I can't remember what it was, to be honest. Obviously, it wasn't product name. I need to zoom out again. It was called product key. So I can basically hard code that value in there. And you can see now that I've got one heading row for every single sheet. And so if you're doing this manual file combine, you need to deal with these extra product keys. So what I'm going to do, I'll come back and repeat the steps. So use first row as headers, and then I'm just going to filter out. I'll deselect all, come down to the bottom, and in fact, what I should have done was just use the same trick that I did before. So which I'm going to have to do. So in this case, it doesn't equals product key is what I need to do. So that will, whoops, now case sensitive language. So you need to make sure that you type it exactly the way it appears. Okay, now this is a little bug in Intellisense. You can see this red and white flashy line. That's telling me that there's a bug, but it's an Intellisense issue. All right, now, if you're observant, you would have noticed that I've got May as the column header. So that's not right. This is the month. Right, so I can go ahead and rename that step. But what's going to happen next month? Next month, so let's do a simulation here. Next month, someone's going to send me a new version of this workbook. And so I'm going to duplicate this sheet. And so next month, I'm going to get a new copy of this workbook, and it's going to have an extra sheet in it called June. So if I make that change now, when I come back to Power Query and I hit refresh, this error is going to occur. And the reason this error occurs is because when you use the user interface, notice here that it says, I've got a function called table.rename columns. That's the name of the function. The first parameter is normally the previous step, right? So filtered rows is the previous step. So what this function says is take whatever I had, and I'll need to go back here a little bit. So it basically comes back to here. It says basically take this query and rename the column called May and call it month. But if you come back here, notice now I don't have a column called May. And so the issue is that we've hard coded, or the Power Query has hard coded the name of the column to June, and a subsequent step is trying to find a column called May, which doesn't exist anymore. So that's the problem that we have to solve. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a feature. I might just delete this and we'll come back to this in a minute. So I'm going to show you a feature. So I'm going to create a new query. So I right click on the queries pane, new query, a blank query. And there's a special function in Power Query, the M language, called shared, #shared. Notice when I type this, it goes red. This is a special function that will basically give me a list of objects that are available within Power Query. And Power Query is a self-documenting language. I'm sorry, more correctly, the M language is self-documenting. And so if you type in a new query equals #shared, lowercase, you will get a list of all of the documentation within Power Query. So I'm going to turn this into a table. And once I've got the table, I can actually filter, just click on this drop-down filter, and I can search for a function that I might need. Now, I don't know, I do know the name of the function, but when you're starting out, you might not know the name of the function. So I'm looking for a function that's going to help me with my column names. So you can start typing in column and start looking at the function, and notice I've got a function here called table.columnnames. So that sounds promising. So I'm going to click on table.columnnames. And when I do that, I can click in this white space again. And when I click in the white space, down the bottom, I get the documentation. This is telling me how the function works. So it's a function, table.columnNames. It takes a table as the input, and it returns a list of column names as the output. So that is a candidate to solve my problems. So I'm going to leave this query here. I'll come back to this step, and I'm going to do a manual step. By default, it tells me the previous step. I do want the previous step in this case, and I'm going to use the function table.columnNames. This is reasonable. There never used to be an Intellisense. It's a little bit flaky, but it's workable. So table.columnNames, and when I apply that function, I get a list of all the column names in the previous table. And this is great because this is what I want. And now using what I've already taught you, if I come here, click in this cell, notice that this is the name of the first column. And so once again, I can right click and drill down. And when I do that, you notice that a new step just appended this. I realize it's a bit small, just appended this. And you already know that this is the row indicator. So this is saying, give me the first row. Now notice that there's no column name here. All right, there's no column name. And the reason there's no column name is that this previous step, sorry for jumping around, this previous step is not a table, it's a list. The difference between a list and a table is a list implies that there's only a single column name. Whereas if you have a table, even if there is only one column, you have to refer to the column itself. All right, so notice from this step, this drill down step, this tells me what to do to get the first column name. All I have to do is put this row indicator on the end. So let me try that out. I'll go back to this step, and if I just hard code curly brace 0, that gives me the name of the first column. And now that I've got the code, think about this for a second. This is the code that tells me the name of the first column. So I'm going to, instead of retaining these steps, I'm going to copy this code into my clipboard. All right, so Control C. This is the code that tells me the name of the first column. And now I can delete these steps. Now that I've done this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to double click and call this month. Notice that Power Query hard codes this. It says find the column called June and rename it month, but I'm going to replace the hard coded reference to the column called June. I'm going to paste the code that generates or provides me with the list of that first column name. So I just do that. At this point, it will still work. And then if I come back here, just for speed, I'm going to delete this. And in fact, the order is important. If I change the order, it would also make a difference. But I'm just going to delete that new sheet. When I come back here, if I just hit refresh preview, so currently it's got June. When I hit refresh preview, it comes back to May, and that will just work without throwing errors. So just let me check if there's anything else. So no, I think that's good. So let me summarize and then ask if there's any more questions regarding that. So in summary, the hash shared function lowercase s gives you a list of all the functions. You can search that list. Intellisense will also do that now. So table.columnNames is a good function to remember. You know, the way I've learned the M language is I've learned functions one at a time as they solve a particular problem. I don't have good depth of understanding of the functional language inside M. What I have is an incremental learning of some of the functions that I can use to solve common problems that I come across. This is how you grow your skills and understanding over time. So once you've also learned that if you've got a list, you can put this, you can hard code this curly brace 0 to get the first row. Indeed, you could put curly brace 1 to get the second row, and so on. And so you can use the UI to generate this code and then cut and paste that code. You don't need to retain the steps. The objective is to get the piece of code that you need to be able to do what you want, then you can insert it back somewhere else inside the query. So let me throw over to Leon and see whether we've got any questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Not questions as such, more comments. So, I mean, Ash calls out that as she was working through that example, it looks quite similar to a pivot table. And Donald mentioned that the hash shared function is always helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay, so let me jump into the final demos. So we've got 20 minutes. I think we're doing okay for time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how you could build a calendar table from scratch. Indeed, you can do anything from scratch inside Power Query. So the predominant use case that you may have seen so far is loading data from a source, but you can actually basically create your own data from scratch if that's what you want to do. And so I'm going to show you how to do that now with my third demo. Just let me shut down, I'll just shut down this other one just in case the Power Query window gets in the way, and just let that load. With that shared query that I created, it's pretty good practice just to disable that so that you don't load it, and then you can hang on to it. Okay, so here's the third example. This time I'm going to get data from a blank query because I'm going to be doing all the coding myself. One thing that I didn't show earlier on, I'm sure many of you know, is that if you jump to the advanced editor, you can actually see all the code that's generated. So this applied steps over here on the right, this is the human readable version. So think of it as the Excel user version. This is the programmer's version of exactly the same thing. So they're both there and they're both valid ways of looking at your data. Okay, so I've already shown you that there's this curly brace thing. Now, technically the curly braces is the list operator. And I can use this curly braces to create a list. So I could, for example, say, give me a list with two values, numbers 1 and 2. So that's an easy way to hard code some data. And in fact, a list can have text values in it if you want. It doesn't have to be numeric. And in fact, there's other cool things you can do with a list. Is I can say, give me a list. This is the list extension, so double dot. Give me a list of numbers from 1 to 10. So there's lots of things you can do just with those curly braces to create a list of values. Now, sorry, my Zoom is on as I switch screens. All right, now what I could do is I could come up to this list and say, well, let me show you what I'm talking about here first. If I go to Excel, I'll just quickly open a blank Excel. And if I put in today's date, or not today's date, 1st of January 2022, all right, if I change that to a number, most of you would know that a date in Excel is a number starting from whatever it is, 31st of December 1899 or something like that. So if I copy that value, what I could do here inside Power Query is say, give me a list of numbers starting from 44562. I'll just do it up to 44700, or I'll just do 44600, 500. That's not going to work. Right, so give me that list of values. Then what I could do is I could turn that list into a table. It asks me, how do I want to do that? So I'll just accept those defaults. And then I could change the data type to a date. And notice now that I've got a list of dates. So that's one way that you could create a list of values. But instead, I'm going to go back to my shared step that I did before. So let me come back here, do a new query, blank query. And this time, before I forget, I'm going to disable the load. And I'm going to go equals hash shared, because I want to find a way of getting a range of dates. So always turn this shared function into a table. That way you get a drop-down list and you can come in here and filter. So I'm after dates. And so when I search for dates, there's one candidate called list.dates. Sounds promising. So I'm going to click OK. And so not only is this a self-documenting language, if you actually click here on the function hyperlink, it will actually trigger a wizard to generate the code for you. So this is a very powerful tool. So it's a function called list.dates. It's giving me the syntax here. But if you click on the hyperlink, it actually generates the code for you. So I want a calendar table starting from today and going through to the end of the year. So I'm going to say 1st of the 1st, 2022. Sorry, not starting from today, but starting from the start of the year. Count is the number. So I happen to know this, that this is how many days you want this list to last for. You might need to read the documentation if you don't understand that or didn't know that. 10, and then I want to step by 1, which is the number of days. So when I click OK, Power Query has actually gone ahead and generated that list of dates for me. I can resize them. But importantly, come and have a look at the code. This session is all about looking at the M code. And so there's got this, it appears to be a function called value, which is a little bit curious because I didn't trigger the function called value. And then it has 3 parameters. It has a date. Now, the usefulness of this little wizard is that I previously didn't know how to hard code a date inside a function, but this, by triggering this function using shared, it's actually shown me the syntax. I would know how to do this in Excel. I didn't know how to do it in M. And so this triggering this function taught me something about the M language. And in fact, I didn't realize that if I want to do this a daily calendar, I had to use the hash duration function instead of just saying 1. So it's absolutely worthwhile triggering these functions from within the shared step as I showed you, because it helps you understand how to write these things. But what is this value? I didn't trigger a function called value. So if we come back over here, you'll note that the previous step is called value. And there's this sort of cascading functional language within Power Query and the M language. So if I go back to the value, notice that value is the reference to the list.dates. In fact, the value step references this, and you know from experience, this step is the previous step, row number 1, column called value. So if we're going to have a look at that one, that is the function. So see how the functional language cascades? This cell contains the function. This query step refers to the cell containing the function. And this query step refers to the step and actually passes the parameters to the step, which passes it to the cell, which passes it to the function. And so there's this cascading concept of functions and steps, etc. And so what I want you to understand is that I can actually skip those previous 2 steps and reuse the function name. So it's list.dates. Now be very careful here because there is a bug in Intellisense. If I hit tab, you can actually lose this code. So I'm just going to click on the outside and click tick. I expect nothing to change because instead of referring to 2 and 3 previous steps, I'm now basically going straight to the source. In fact, when I hover, you can see the Intellisense telling me the syntax. And so if I tick, that should just work. So this is the code to generate a calendar table starting from the 1st of January 2022 and lasting for 10 days, and it's a day level calendar. So without writing, well, hardly any M code, just by using the user interface, I've skipped a whole lot of pain and learned how to create this first step. So I'm going to copy that code, Control-C, and then I'm just going to go and delete all this stuff that the UI generated for me. I'm going to go all the way back to the source. In fact, I should have jumped over to this one. Go back to the source, and I'm just going to paste my code. I need the equals. One more thing I might show you just while this is top of mind. If you type list.dates or any function name inside a source step, so notice I've typed list.dates. Notice there's no brackets. So if I put brackets and hit tick, I get an error. If you put brackets, it's saying where are the parameters. But if you don't put brackets, if I just type the name of a function, no brackets, and hit tick, you get that same documentation. So if you know the name of the function that you need, you don't understand the syntax, type in the name of the function, don't put any brackets, and then you can just come in here and do it. In fact, I'll just do it again for illustration. Now I don't have to understand the syntax. I can just type it in. 1/1/2022. I want 10 days and I want to do it 1 day at a time. I invoke that function and that's gone ahead and done the same thing as before. I actually don't like that because it's actually generated a new query. And so I'm going to just paste the code that I generated before and I'll rename this my calendar. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to continue to build my query, but good practice for a calendar table is your calendar table should take you through to the end of the current year or the end of the year with the current date in it. Now, just checking time, we're sort of running out of time, so you could go back to the shared function if you want to, but I'm going to add a manual step here. And I need to know what today's date is. And so I'm going to use Intellisense. I'm not going to take the previous step. I'm just going to try and find a function for today. So in Excel, there's a function called today. So if I type in today, there doesn't appear to be a function called today. So that's not going to help me. But if I type in now, there is a function called date time local now, which looks promising. I'm going to take that function. It doesn't take any parameters, which means I can just go open, close brackets. And when I do that, it gives me the date and time. So it's the 4th of March 2022, and it's and that's the time. Now, once again, just to save a little bit of time, if I go to use this, it's going to cause a problem. And so what I need to do is I need to strip the time portion off. And so this is where I'll show you this. I'm going to copy this. I'll show you what happens here. I need another function to give me just the date portion. So you can start to type in Intellisense. And you notice it's not perfect. So if I go date time dot date, there is a function that will extract the date portion. I'm jumping ahead to save a bit of time. And then I basically stick that inside this function. So now I've got the date portion. And so what this has now done, and notice that this is now a scalar value, grey background. It's not in a column or a list. It's a scalar value. And it's also good practice in the calendar table to extend through to the end of the year. And so I'm going to put an open bracket here. I need a end of year. So just have a guess. The names are there. So there's a function called date.endofyear. I'll take that one, tab. Let me just show you this. I was going to show you this before. I'll do it now. But if I typed in date, see how the Intellisense is not working here? So if I put that open bracket first, then I can start typing a new function. Hopefully the Intellisense will get fixed at some point in time. End of year, and now I need to close it. And that takes me through to the 31st of December. All right, so now what I've got is I've got this step, and I'm going to rename this step, and I'm going to call it end. Back to my source, I've hard-coded the source here. And what I will do instead is I'm going to add another manual step. I'll come down to the back here. I'll add another manual step. I don't want to refer to the previous step. I'm just going to hard code 1st of the 1st, 2022. Now, if I put equals, if I go equals 1st of the 1st, 2022, it assumes it's division. But if I don't put an equal sign, it assumes it's a date. Okay, so that's a good way to enter a date. And I'm going to rename this step start. So now I can go ahead and insert the start date and end date into the source step. But hang on for a second, I can't do that because it's asking for the start date, but it doesn't ask for the end date. It wants to know the duration of my calendar. And so I can't put the end date. I need to calculate the duration. And so what I could do, both of these are scalar values. So I'm just going to try and write another function. I need to go to the last step. I'm going to try and write another function that just subtracts them. So I want the end to subtract the start. All right, this is what I would do in Excel. And if I do that, I get this thing. And once again, just to save time, notice that this is not an integer. Notice that it appears to be some sort of date time format. If I try to use this in the duration column, it's going to fail. We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to show you that you can, there's a function called, so open bracket, duration.days. The function duration.days takes one of these date time formats and extracts the number of days from that. And so now I've got all the pieces I need. So I'll call this length. And now I can go back to my first step, noticing that the order is not important. And so now I can say, I'm not going to hard code the date. I'm going to use the start step. I'm not going to hard code the duration. I'm going to use the length step. And I still need this because it's a daily calendar. And when I do that, it gives me a list of dates. And then the last thing I need to do before progressing is I'm going to do another step. But I don't want the previous step. I need to go all the way back to the source and grab the source step and turn it into a column or into a table more correctly. What I've done is notice that the source step is the function. These three steps are all technical in order to be able to do some calculations. I've inserted them in a previous step, even though these steps didn't come till later. And then after I've done that, I've gone back and grabbed the source. And from here, I can do things like change that into a date. And then I can start adding columns, like add the year, add the month, and so on. And so the rest is pretty easy because you're using the user interface. So we're all but out of time. So I'm going to just summarize. So you can use this list operator if you want. We've already talked about the shared keywords, so use that. Once you learn how the code works, you can use that back in any of your steps. And I haven't done any merge queries because I sort of skipped over that towards the end. So look, that's it. I will take any questions on that topic and anything else. I don't have a hard stop, so I'm happy to hang on. It's up to you, Leon. I'll leave that to you in a second. I just want to call out the skillwave.training company that I work with, Ken Pools. There's the QR code. If you scan that, it will take you to our website. I would like to offer you all 20% discount on any of our online training courses. We've got this free course on Power Query is a great way to get started. This course here has got nearly 24 hours of step-by-step instructional training, very similar to what I've just shown you here. And so you will become an expert without doubt if you learn Power Query from us. And so there's a 20% discount until the 13th of March. And Leon, over to you for any final questions.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Matt. That was an absolutely amazing session and very informative and well explained. So thank you very much. And also thank you on behalf of all of us to yourselves at Skillwave for providing the discount code to the user group. That's very kind of you. In terms of the questions, we do have one coming in from Donald. Now, Donald asks, is there a show query dependency view?
Yes, there is. Very good question. Let me get out of this. So which query? Let's go back to this one. If you come up to the view, there is a, oh, sorry, I need to go into Power Query. So come back into Power Query, go into the view, and there's the query dependency view here under views. Look, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. So when you've got a small number of queries like this, you can see what's going on. So connect to the source. And so here's all the flows. I promise you, when you get to 100 queries, this becomes less helpful, but it can still be useful because you can click on any of the queries and it shows you the heritage of that query. And if you click on any queries, it shows you where that query goes. So yeah, that's how you find that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. And I just want to take a moment as well just to say that in the chat, we do have our feedback form. So based on today's webinar, please do provide us feedback to help us continue to grow our Microsoft Power BI UK user group. With that being said, Matt, we do have another question coming in from Antonio. First and foremost, they said, thanks, it's really interesting. And they're asking, is it not really necessary to learn deep M code functions? What they're referring to here is managing the UI, using the shared table and quite flight hours. Could it be enough to solve most of the usual ETL steps?
My experience, 90% of my requirements can be done through the user interface. And so I don't think you need to learn the M language to get lots of value from Power Query. But I'm a hacker. I like getting under the hood. I like learning how things work. And so if you don't want to learn M, there's no problem with that. You'll still be very successful with Power Query. But if you do invest a little bit of time and don't expect to learn in one session, incrementally learn over time. And so as you do that, you learn how the language works. Be very careful. There's no undo inside the Power BI user interface. So if you delete a step or if you change the M code and you don't like it, there's no going back. So just be very careful. One thing that you can do is you can come into the advanced editor. So if you're going to do some hacking, you're not sure what you're doing, just take a copy of that, paste it into a notepad, and then if something goes wrong, you can get back to where you started from. But I'm not sure on the exact question, but I say you don't need to do it. But anyone that does learn the M language to a certain extent, in combination with the UI, I think you'll be a more powerful Power Query user.
Excellent, very well put. And another question coming in from Fernando. Now, they ask a question directed, a personal preference to yourself there, Matt, is do you prefer Power Query online or in the desktop?
Oh, that's an easy question. That's an easy answer. Good question with an easy answer. Desktop times 1,000 preference over online. Now, I believe, well, you only have to look at what Microsoft's doing with Power BI, a Power Query online, to realize they're investing a lot of time and money in it. There are a whole lot of, there's a drag and drop UI that exists online that does not exist in desktop. So if you look at the history of the way Microsoft works, if you look at what happened with Power Pivot for Excel has not had a lot of love for a long time. So that says to me that that's not going to be a long-term product. So all the work seems to be going into online as the first, so cloud first. I'm hoping that capability will come to Power BI and Power Query desktop, but it certainly hasn't yet. Power Query online has a lot of potential, but to me, it's just slow and not as performant. And I don't have time to tap my fingers on the table waiting for a query to be validated that takes 30 seconds when it takes a sub-second in desktop. So I'm not a big fan of Power Query online, but it appears to be the future. Everything's going to cloud. I just think it's got a way to go before it'll be ready.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. And it looks like that's all of the questions that we have for today's session.
Okay, terrific. Well, it's been great to get involved. Thanks for the invitation, Leon.
No problem at all. I mean, we'd love to have you back with us again in the future as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about DAX. I've got a lot of, we can catch up and talk about something later on in the year, no problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you to all of our participants as well. It's been great to have you with us. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here with us. And as always, this event was brought to you in association with Onyx Data. We look forward to seeing you all again soon, and stay safe.